I'm very tired this morning, but I'm not going to let that be an excuse to avoid doing another Leetcode video. For the 3 people out there that watch this, comment if you like this solution, and let me know what other problems you'd like to see solved. It's pretty hard out there right now in tech. We're experiencing a major bubble burst, and people are getting laid off like crazy. So if you're out there and you recently got laid off, keep your head up. All you can really do is continue grinding Leetcode and prep for interviews, I guess. Anyways, let's get right into this problem. Okay, so problem 2370, longest ideal subsequence. You're given a string S consisting of lowercase letters and an integer k. We call string T ideal if the following conditions are satisfied. T is a subsequence of the string S, and the absolute difference in the alphabet order of every 2 adjacent letters is T is less than or equal to K. Return the length of the longest ideal string. And of course, a subsequence is a string that can be derived from any other string by deleting some or no characters without changing the order of the characters, right? So if you have a string like A, B, C, D, E, right, you can take any characters from it in order, and that would be a subsequence. So hopefully you understand what a subsequence is, because it's an essential component of a lot of Leetcode problems. Note the alphabet order is not cyclic. For example, if the absolute difference of A and Z is 25, not 1. Okay. Oh, okay. So it's not like, okay, so I get that, right? It's stuck between 0 and 26. That's what this is saying, right? Because, you know, when you look from A to Z, it's A, then B, then Z, A, then B, then Z. Apparently, I don't know my own alphabet. A, B, C, dot, 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 Z, right? So the difference between these two things is 25, right? Not like, well, A is 1 away from Z to the left, right? Because the alphabet, imagine if the alphabet being continuous, so it started again, like went A through Z, then A through Z. So imagine it went A through Z, and then A started again, so you could say, oh, these are a distance of 1 away. But no, they're 25 away because it's not a cycle. Okay, I didn't even think about that, but I mean, I guess that is an important distinction to make. Okay, so when we look at this problem, we have S equals A, C, F, G, B, D, and K equals 2. So what does that mean for this problem? Well, that means that for any letter, the previous letter has to be less than or equal to 2 characters away, right? And what I mean by 2 characters away, right, is that they're relative distance to each other in the alphabet, right? So A and C are 2 characters away. So when we look at A, right, the longest thing we can get with A is just A itself. When we look at C, the longest subsequence we can get with C, well, A is 2 letters away, so you can include A in this subsequence, right? Now we can just automatically add C to this subsequence, right? Because the longest subsequence for C will be the best subsequence for any subsequent character. Meaning, like, I don't need to be like, okay, I have a case where I attach A to C, and I have a case where I just have C alone. Right? I don't need to do this, because if you can attach A to C, it's definitely going to be better for a longer subsequence than just having C alone. Right? So I can naturally, intuitively just say, well, if I can attach C to anything, I might as well attach it to the longest subsequence coming before C. All right, now when I look at F, C, D, E, so the longest subsequence is just F. G can be attached, right? Because G can be attached to F because less than 2 away. B is 1 away from C, right? So, but B is also 1 away from A. So you could attach it to either A or C, right? You could have another subsequence of link 2 here, but obviously, again, remember the idea is you just want to attach it to the longest such subsequence you can find that it can be attached to. All right, so B would be attached here, and then D is 2 away from B, right? B, C, D, and B is also, or D is also 2 away from, or 1 away from C. So you could, again, it's the same idea. You could attach it here, but obviously you're going to want to attach it to the longest such spot, which is D. Right. So the answer is 4 because ACBD, right, this sequence here. So I think the brute force solution for this problem, right, an easy solution to determine is look at each character and then look at all the characters that came before it and see if you can attach it to any of the existing subsequences that you found, which is kind of what we did here, right? Right, we looked at A and added it. Then we looked at C and we looked at everything that came before C and attached it if it was possible. Then we looked at F and looked at everything that came before F and attached it. Then looked at G, then looked at everything that came before G to find the best candidate, right? And looked at B and looked at everything that came before it to find the best candidate and try to attach it like that. So that has n squared time, right? Because you have to look at each character and you have to look at each character that comes before each character. So in the worst case runtime, that's n squared, right? Because imagine that all of these, like you had, trying to think of epsilon, beta, delta, I don't know. You had these 3 letters, right? And then this last letter X. Imagine that each of these were their own individual sequences. So when you try to find where X can go, you're going to have to attach X to one of these. You have to check, okay, can X be added to this subsequence? Can X be added to this subsequence? Can X be added to this subsequence? Right, so you can see how this takes n squared time. Okay, now I think a more intuitive way, not more intuitive, maybe it's not more intuitive, but one way you can look at this problem is kind of by filtering the things that you can attach this character to, right? Since we have a strict condition about K, the K value, you know intrinsically like what values something can be attached to, right? Right, like when you have A, for example, you have the A sequence, whatever. Let's look at C. So when you have C, before you look at anything else, you know because of this K equals 2, the only subsequence it can be appended to, right? The only like list like this that it can be appended to is one that ends in A, B, C, D, or E. And how do I know that? Well, because K equals 2, right? Since K equals 2, that means that the only characters where it's less than or equal to K difference, right? Because the difference between A and C is 2. The difference between A and B is 1, 0, 1, and 2. Right? So for every letter, there's 2K plus 1, right? Because there's K values, there's itself, and then K values. There's 2K plus 1 values that this letter can be appended to and not break the system, right? So again, if K was equal to 3 and I gave you the letter F, lowercase f, right? That means that the only letters it can be attached to are G, H, and I. I don't know why I keep doing uppercase. And C, D, and E, right? So just by giving information about F, I know that it can only attach to one of these following letters, right? So why am I making this distinction? Well, how about instead of looking at all the subsequences that came before me, I only look at the subsequences that came before me that are within this range, right? So when I do this problem, I can have an array of size 26, right? Because there's 26 letters in the alphabet. U, V, W, X, Y, Z. So we don't even need to look at this whole thing because, so initially all these things have value 0. Okay, so what I'm saying is what this array is essentially going to be is the longest subsequence that ends with this letter. Okay? And why are we doing that? Well, then we can essentially do, since we only need to look at letters within the range of 2k plus 1, right? Negative k itself and plus k, right? When you find a letter, you can just look at the subsequences that end. Like if you're adding C, all you have to do is find the longest subsequence you've seen so far that ends in A, that ends in B, that ends in C, that ends in D, and ends in E, and append C to that longest one, right? So when I do this problem, when I see A, well, A, of course, is the first one, so there's nothing to look at. When I look at C, right, I look at C as my, well, let's actually just write this down. So we have K equals 2, and then we have A, we'll make it blue. We have S equals A, C, F, G, B, D. So when we add A, right, there's nothing before it to even add, so you might as well just leave it. So let's look at C. So when we add C, well, what are the only letters that C can be appended to? Well, C can be appended to itself, right? And then these minus K values and these plus K values. So the longest subsequence going to C is the one including A plus 1, right? Because now this is associated with just A. And now we can append the C1 to the A1, which gives this one length 2, right? Which corresponds to A and then C. Right, so I only have to look at 2k plus 1 values to find the longest one, because those are the only 2k plus 1 values that this thing could even be appended to. All right. And then we look at F, and we play the same game. So we look at F, we look at minus 2k, minus k, and plus k. Now there's no letters so far we've seen in the subsequence that even are within its range. So this thing just becomes an F, right? And here what I'm doing is I'm writing out the subsequence and as length 1. Okay, and then let's look at G. All right, and you'll notice for G, what happens? We have G, and then we have minus and minus. Well, there's F that comes before G. Since we're processing this in order, we know that everything we see is a part of a valid subsequence that comes before the letter because we process the letters in order, right? So that's an invariant. If I see a number in this array, I know that it can be a valid part of this subsequence because it comes before the current letter that I'm looking at. So G, you'll notice that F, right, has a value of 1. So that means that there's something with a value of 1 that's within the K range for this character, which means that this will then have a value of 2 because it is FG. All right, and then we process B, and I'm not going to highlight anymore, but we look at B. Now, actually, I will highlight because there's, an important example here. We have AB, a nothing, right, because it can't go higher, and then CD. Now it has options, right? It can attach itself to A or it can attach itself to AC, but B can be attached to A, B, C, or D. So it might as well attach itself to C because C is longer. So this becomes 3, corresponding to ACB. And then we play the same game with D, and D becomes 4 because it'll attach itself to this one, plus 1, so ACBD. and that's the longest subsequence. Now, we don't need to actually keep information about what the longest subsequence is, just its length. So we don't need to worry about that. So what's the natural runtime of this? Well, we have to look at each character, and there's n characters, right? And then we have to do 2k plus 1 operations, right? Because we have to compare it to the 2k plus 1 things that can come before the letter, right? For any letter like C, right, there's 2k plus 1 things that can come before it, right? There's k values in this direction and k values in this direction, right? The letters D, E, F, and B, whatever, coming before it. So we have to look at the 2k operations for each character, and there's n characters. So this is O of nk, right? But you'll notice that k can't be bigger than 25, right? Because there's only 26 characters in this whole system. So this is O of n, right? Because k is a constant. K is less than 25. So it's either O of nk or O of n, depending on how you want to look at it, right? Because someone could say, well, it's a constant, right? It has to be less than 25, so we can just disregard k. Yeah, but everything's a constant to a certain point, right? Like s, which is n in this example, right, is less than 10 to the 5. So is that also a constant, right? So there's kind of this arbitrary decision you have to make about when you consider variable, when you don't. So if I was in an interview, I'd say, okay, it's O of nk or it's O of n. If you want to say that k is so small that it's a constant, then it's O of n. That's how I would approach explaining that. But who knows if it's right. So back to this problem. All right, so we have this array of size 26, this green array. And we'll just call that our dynamic programming array. It's 0 times 26, right? And then we look at each character in S. Now what we want is the order of each of these characters in comparison to other characters, right? Because B is 1 away from A, which is less than k equals 2, right? So what I'm going to do is just convert all these things to their offset. That way it's a little bit easier to manage them, right? So if I take a character and I take the order of the character and I minus it from the order of A, I'll get a natural offset between the deltas between each character, right? So if the character is B and I minus the order of A, well, B will be something and A will be something that's 1 less. So this difference will equate to 1. Okay. And then what am I applying that to? I'm applying that to S. And then for each thing, the best substring to go to that character is what? It's the maximum of the characters that come k before it, right? So that's, if we were looking at the letter, for example, if C was equal to k, right? The letters that come k before it to the letters that become k after it, right? And that would be k and then L plus M, right? So we said the whole thing was we have to look at 2k plus 1 characters, right? So there's negative k characters in this direction, and then k characters plus 1 in this direction. So 2k plus 1 characters. And then if we do that for each character, we should get the solution. And at the end, we just return the maximum of D, right? Because D has each of the values, right? Notice what? Notice that I click enter. An empty sequence. Okay, so I'm guessing what's happening here is C minus K can be negative, right? So you could have negative C minus K, C like is B and K is 4. So B minus 4, B is 1, 1 minus 4, negative 3. So that could cause it to like have a negative first into C and a positive. So I'm just gonna force this to be 0 if it gets too small. And then the array on the other side could also go out of bounds, right? Like maybe you're looking at character Z and k equals 4. There's no characters after that. But Python will let you take these slices and actually increase past the point of the end of the array, and it won't error. It'll just give you an empty sequence. So that's fine. All right. Oh, and then, sorry. So the maximum sequence is the maximum thing I can connect to, right? So the maximum character that's within the within the 2k plus 1 range from me. So it's the maximum one that I can connect to plus 1, right? Because now I'm attaching myself to that sequence, right? So for all these problems, remember, like for B, when I first added C, right? So it became AC, right? The maximum thing I could connect to was A, and then I added 1 to make it 2. Because the maximum thing I connect to was this sequence that ended, this subsequence that ended in A, and then I added myself to it, so I added 1 additional element. So now the length becomes whatever the length of the subsequence I'm attaching to is, plus me, which is length 1. So length of the subsequence I'm attaching to, plus 1. So this is the length of the mask subsequence I can attach myself to, plus 1 to include myself. All right, let's submit that. Don't pray for love. And there you go. Gang, 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 gang. We call that a 3-line solution where I'm from. So yeah, this is as O of n k runtime, or O of n if you want to say k is so small, right? It's a constant. It's because it's less than 26. And yeah, so what's some of the intuition from this problem? Well, there's a natural n squared solution, right? Where you look at each character, then you look at all possible subsequences that could come before it. But since k is restricted, there's only certain characters that any subsequent character can be appended to in a subsequence. So you can just restrict your search to only those characters, which gives you a much better runtime, right? From O of n squared to nk. N is, like, in this problem was, what, 10 to the 5? Right, so n was 10 to the 5. So that took you from a 10 to the 10 solution to a 10 to the 5 times 10 times 2.5, so 10 to the 6-ish, right? So that's the beauty of dynamic programming and solving Leetcode problems. All right, peace.